And we are live.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll call the proceedings to order and invite you, Penny, and your team to open with a karakia.
Atamari e koutou, kia inoi tātou. E te atua kaharawa mana ki tia mai mātou. Toko mai o whakaro ki rote o mātou nākau. Wakapaingo mātou kuia kou mātua, nā whānau tainoa ki ngā mokapuna hoki. Ho mai tō aroha ki ngā whānau pani o Wira Gardner mō tēnei wā pauri, kei rungo e rātou, mamai kei rungo e rātou, tangi ana. Moi mai rā e te rangatira e wira, haere atu koe, haere atu, haere atu. Nō reira, kia pai tō whakahokia, kei roti tō ingoa tapu, āke, 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 āmini.
Tēnā rā tātou te whānau whānui o te tai tokirau, nui te mihi atu ki a koutou i tēnei ata. Ai, ka tika e hoa te kōrero e pāna ki a wira, i te rangatira e wira, moi mai, takoto mai. Anō ki ngā mate kua huhua, tēnā koutou haere, haere, haere o tu ate, o ti atu. Nō reira, kei te tukumihi atu i nei o te komihana o te kāhui kaunihira o Aotearoa, ngā kaunihira katoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora. Kei a koe, Brendan.
Kia ora, Benita. Can I just further acknowledge clearly the passing of Sir Wira? It's a pretty sad day for us, to be frank. We all knew that man. We all had enormous respect for him, and we hold him in incredibly high regard. And for those of us who remember when he first joined the Local Government Commission, there were some modestly challenging times, and he had an extraordinary ability to be able to walk into any room and any local authority anywhere in New Zealand and engage in such a simple and meaningful manner. The humorous side, of course, is that there always had to be scones with jam and whipped cream. And some local authorities had to go downtown and make sure that they got them in time for Wira's arrival. But he was that sort of man that was able just to keep everybody calm and measured, but then pass on extraordinary skills with dignity and respect. So I'm really, really pleased that we've made those acknowledgements out of respect to an amazing man. So I just want to say thank you for that. As we go into the proceedings for today, I'd like to introduce our team, just so that everybody's aware of who's on screen. And so it might be appropriate, Benita, if you introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Commissioner Anea, and we'll work our way through from there. So Commissioner Bigham.
Tēnā koe, te tia mana, kia ora, Brendan. Tēnā no tātou, ko Bonita Bigham tōku ingoa, he uri ahau no ngā ruehini me te atiawa, I noho I raro I te maru o tā tātou maunga a Taranaki, kei te mihi atu ki a koutou. Kia ora everybody, Bonita Bigham. I am here in South Taranaki and am a temporary commissioner at this stage, having been here for a few months now. And I am a current community board member in the South Taranaki District Council, and also an iwi rep at both South Taranaki District Council and Taranaki Regional Council as well. So thank you for the warm mihi this morning. Kia ora.
Commissioner Anea.
Kia ora, everyone. Lovely to be with you, coming in from sunny Timaru at the moment. I've been lucky enough to have 18 years in local government, 9 as Mayor of the Timaru District, and I've had a further 7 years on the Local Government Commission. So really looking forward to the hearing this morning. Kia ora.
Thank you, Commissioner Nair. So, kia ora, I'm Brendan Duffy, the Chair of the Commission, and had 21 years involvement in local government, 12 as the Mayor of Portowhenua, and some time on National Council, and continue to be involved in all sorts of stuff around the motu. There's only the 3 commissioners hearing today. Along with the commissioners, we've got the team from Local Government New Zealand. You'll see Donald Reservos, who's our principal advisor, and will be known to many of you. Linda Canton, who is our senior advisor, and Penny Langley, who is our CEO. Why are you two laughing so much? Have I done something wrong?
You just introduced us as coming from Local Government New Zealand, Brendan.
Well,
last time I checked, we worked for the Commission, but if there's something you need to tell us.
Well, you know, that's a Freudian slip, and it's the first time I've done it after 30-something hearings, so you guys get to see it. I apologise. All right, with that out of the way, Penny, we'll pass over to you now. If you can introduce your team, and then when you've done that, we'll go straight into your observations in relation to your decisions, and then we'll go from there.
Ina mana, ina reo, ina rangatira mā. Tēnā tātou katoa. He mihi ni nui tēnei. Mō tēnei kaupapa hohonu kia tātou katoa. Ko wai aho. Ko tutumoe te maunga, ko wairo te awa, ko kaipara te moana. No Dagavola aho. Ko te hiamana aho o te konihira arohi o te tautokoro. Kia ora katoa. So Penny Smart, this is my first term as chair, second 2 terms as a councillor. Very pleased to be here today, happy to be here today to take part in this korero, and I'll allow my team members to introduce themselves if that's okay, Brendan.
Kia ora matata o te hui nei no reira tēnā koutou katoa ko Malcolm Nicholson toko ingoa, ko Ota Tumoaki, o te konihira aroe o te tautokara. Good morning everyone, Malcolm Nicholson, Chief Executive.
Kia ora koutou, nice to meet you. My name is Ben Lee. I'm the Policy and Planning Manager here at the Regional Council, and I've been involved in helping to take the representation review through its process. So nice to meet you. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa. He mihi whakahoki a kia koutou katoa, kia koe hoki, Benita Commissioner, kei rote I tēnei wā. He uri a hau, no Ngāpuhi, no Ngāti Hine, no Ngāti Tuwhare Toa hoki, ko te paumana whakahaere a hau o te kaunihira ārohe o te tautokero. Kia ora nā koutou katoa. My name is Royal Ruka, and I am the paumana whakahaere, or the Group Manager for Governance and Engagement. Kei konei ahau ki te tautoko o te kaupapa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Oriel. Would you be able to introduce Chris?
Kia ora. And on the webinar to join us is my Governance and Support Manager, Chris Taylor, as well. Nō reira, tēnā koe, Chris. Kia ora.
Good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Oriel, Ben and Malcolm. Are we going to share our screen?
Yes. Yeah.
So we have a presentation that we'll share with you, and I'll speak to it and run through. I don't know, Brendan, whether you want to wait till the end or ask questions throughout. Just let me know.
No, you shoot through, and then we'll go for questions at the end.
Okay.
So all windows. I'm just looking for our other windows. I'll just go down. There we go. Just checking everyone can see that.
Yep.
I'll just
Contact
do this.
whatever side.
You. From beginning, slideshow. From beginning. And I will just minimize this. unless you want to see the faces there.
It might be a little bit helpful actually.
Okay. How's that? Is that all right?
Does that look all right on your end, Brendan?
Ka pai?
Can't hear you, but
Okay, now, absolutely fine. Penny Langley's nodding, so we're all good. Yep,
Okay.
good.
Bring that
Shoot.
down a bit. Try that.
okay, so opening slide, we'll move to the next one. And you can hear me all right, Brendan, or do I need to speak up? Just let me know. I have got a quiet voice, so I tend to.
No, crystal clear, crystal clear.
Probably better
Yeah,
here
go
like
on
that.
that one.
Yeah.
That's better.
Kia ora. There we go, Penny.
Okay. So we've been through most of that, and just we would like to acknowledge that we did have 33 submitters in this process and 3 appellants, however, only 2 today. So Northland, or Te Tautokoro, awesome region right at the top here. Total population 195-ish. With the Maori numbers there, 25%, we were just having a conversation earlier in that we do actually know that it's higher than that. That 25% is probably more like 33, 36 currently. But I acknowledge that we do have to use these, or we have used these figures for this representation review. And interestingly, in the far north area, it's actually more like 50-50. And I guess the other thing of note there is that we are still one of the few regions, if not the only one, that has a 50-50 split between rural and urban. So we have 9 councillors currently. I guess here we've got a couple of constituencies with 2 councillors, but most people, or the majority of Northlanders, are used to having 1 councillor per region. So in our preliminary considerations for this representation review, we did resolve first past the post again. Interestingly, one of the other councils went for the other one, STV. Anyway, we prefer the first past the post. We didn't have to, but we decided to also look at Maori seats. That was done 3 years ago, but we wanted to, there was quite a consensus around the table that we wanted to do it again. And hence the representation review. So yeah, we certainly took into consideration the 3 aspects of any representation review: communities of interest, representation, effective representation of the our communities, and fair representation to all electors. So we, although we didn't have a preliminary consultation, we did consult quite heavily with tangata whenua, which was predominantly through our, well, not predominantly, but certainly we had easy access to our Te Tautokoro Maori Advisory Group, and we used them as well as iwi chairs and iwi CEOs. And it was, yeah, so a real focus. We had about 3 months to prepare the initial proposal. Certainly put a lot of effort into the consultation though. So the Te Tīmek focus consultation, I'll call it. As I said, various conversations were had with Te Tīmek about our decision to establish Maori constituencies. They were very much behind the idea, of course, and we had actually previously canvassed with Te Tīmek or some of their members, or I had, their aptitude for that, and they were certainly on board with it. They did let us know that there was a preference for 11 councillors, which meant there would be 3 Maori councillors. Interesting though, and I don't know whether this is necessary or not, but I have had conversations with the co-chair of the Te Tīmek committee, and he was quite he seemed to think that 9 councillors in total worked, or 9 governance members worked best in his opinion. So just thought I'd add that in there. They were TTMAC, although they did like the idea of having specific Maori wards, they realised and were in full agreement that it needed to be done for Maori by Maori. So it would be a phased approach and have one, and for this year's election, we'd have only one Maori constituency with the 2 Maori elected members. Anything more on there? Next one. So the dates there, we provided TTMAC with an updated, firmed up council proposal on the 10th of June and sought advice on the name for the Maori constituency. We were very pleased with what they came up with. We also sought advice from iwi CEOs and the Te Kahu o Tōnui Iwi Chairs Collective. We weren't always, there's such a busy group of people that we're not always successful at getting their ear when we need it. However, we did eventually, and even though it was a reasonably brief conversation, amongst other things that were discussed, they were certainly well on board with the wards. They didn't actually, that I remember, give us any preference to the numbers. So what was discussed in our representation review? We talked about if we did retain 9 councillors, it would mean a 7 and 2 split. We did discuss other options, the 10, which would be 8 and 2, or 11, 8 and 3. We were certainly very aware of the importance to accommodate and determine regional communities of interest, and also the other 2 aspects, effective representation and fair representation. And as stated previously, we were using the population estimates from the 30th of June 2020, which have been superseded. So I've pretty much covered this one. Single constituency with 2 Maori councillors region-wide was the preferred stance. We did look at the other 2 options, but decided in the end for the phased approach, where we would have a lot more information from our Maori elected members, and also TTMAC and Ilgase and Te Kahu o Tōnui. After we'd had a full term, it would seem to make a lot more sense to wait. So this was the timetable, or the dates that we carried out all our meetings and discussions. Starting off on the 4th of November 2020 and ending on the 25th of May 2021. So it was the staff did an excellent job in holding workshops and giving us information, as councillors did, and having robust discussion. And the formal process again started on the 28th of July 2021 and ended 26th of November 2021. Given the constraints of COVID and everything else that was going on, the pace and scale of change, we were very comfortable with how these went. Have I moved too fast through these, Brendan? No, all good.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
So how we came to our next one, thanks, Oriel. Communities of interest. So council, in determining the regional communities of interest, we were keen to see that there was better representation in the rural areas of the region. That is where we do most of our mahi. Obviously, we looked at providing good access to councillors, and we wanted to reflect population concentrations in Whangarei urban and along the east coast where we have most of our population, bearing in mind that we have got that 50-50 split between urban and rural. Creating constituencies that group like communities of interest with similar population sizes was front and centre as well. And we were aware that the Mid-North area had previously been, or is currently, split between two constituencies. And we wanted to change that. Effective and fair representation. So currently there are 9 councillors. We consider this number to be a really good balance, actually. It does enable out robust debate and efficient and effective decision making. And this is, I think, evident in the amount of work that we get through. We are a very cohesive team. With 2 councillors from the Maori constituency, this did lead to 7, coming down to 7 general constituencies. So yes, 2 less general councillors, but remembering that the Kaikohe Hokianga, for instance, was a plus or minus, was below the plus or minus 10%. And it was brought up by our youngest councillor. Sorry, where are we?
Remuneration.
Oh yes, by our younger councillor, that the remuneration, if it was spread any further between the 9, that they would have to look very seriously about whether they stood or not. And it's certainly been great having a younger person on council this term. Not that the other ones weren't great also, but it has given us that diversity that is lacking in many councils, I think. We have got, times are changing. We have got greater online access to technology, and I think this is only going to grow. Yeah, councillors are a lot more available online. I do most of my constituent liaison with either email or a phone call. As chair, I don't get as much time, admittedly, but it's very effective. And with Zoom meetings now, I think there's been a lot of uptake. I think we heard from one of our appellants that their interest has certainly been able to be satisfied a lot more by being able to use the webinars and the live stream. So this is our initial proposal, 7 general, 2 Maori, with 8 constituencies. So you can see on the map there where those constituencies landed. And with the numbers being all quite even as far as constituents within those boundaries. Okay, next one. So there were some features of the initial proposal that we did work through. Uneven spread of population creates challenges to create constituencies that represent similar population sizes, which was made more apparent by removing the by moving to 2 Maori seats. However, it did give us better or good representation in the Mid-North. The Coastal South, Coastal Central and Bay of Islands, Whangaparāoa, general constituencies were characterised with communities with a strong connection to the East Coast. That East Coast strip does a huge amount of work, and actually the sort of urbanish communities or the lifestyle communities work exceptionally well with the rural communities and getting environmental work done on the ground. Aligning boundaries with TAs where possible, it was challenging. They they do align in some ways, but it's never easy to get it perfect. And also, of course, the TAs were still going through their representation review. So Whangarei Central, confined to the city centre and a single councillor. Currently there are 2. However, the confining of just one councillor into the CBD allowed the other regions to come in closer to those lifestyle blocks and get that connection with the rural people or the rural communities, and working together to get work done environmentally. I think it's quite different being a regional council. That environmental connection is a lot stronger between the urban and the lifestyle and rural. So our campaign, it actually included quite a lot. It was a big lot of work for our staff and our councillors, and we would have had we not been COVID affected, we would have done a lot more of the face-to-face. But we did have video content, social media advertising, radio advertising, including on our Māori radio networks in Taitokoro, media releases and print advertising. And unfortunately, we did have 5 pop-up stalls at local markets planned because they had worked very well for us previously with our long-term plan and annual plan consultations. But we did manage to get 2 in, and I think they were Waipu and Onarahi. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And so one of these was in Mrs. Hicks's area. So yes, we did try and compensate for the amount of COVID affected consultations with upping the amount of online and offline promotion. We did have a virtual hui, and that went exceptionally well, didn't it, Oriel? Yeah, we got 20-ish people, a lot of good questions about the Māori wards, which were more than adequately answered. And I think everyone was very happy with the way it went. We did use 2 or 3 of our TTMAC members on that virtual hui as well. That was recorded, of course, and able to be viewed at a later stage. And we had 4 short videos, which were available for viewing after the event as well. So our final proposal, yes, 33 submissions were received. Some were out of scope. Not too many though, I don't think. Maybe half a dozen. We did, after robust discussion and debate, and honestly there was, we considered all the matters raised, and we confirmed our initial, sorry, I'm reading 2 PowerPoints here. We've confirmed our initial position and the final proposal on 19th of October 2021. Obviously there were 3 appeals raised, and as I said, 1 was out of scope. The 2 were, or the 3 were at-large constituencies for general seats, which you'll know, inaccessible and technical constraints associated with Zoom or online processes. So we considered the appeals as well, of course. At-large constituency for general seats was not supported. I think there's a high risk of members being Whangarei centric. As far as I'm aware, no other regional councils have only 2 constituencies, one being Māori and one being general. Is that correct? Yeah. So I don't think you can have only 1 constituency for regional councils anyway, can you? I think Dale informed us of that last week. The inaccessible and technical constraints associated with Zoom or online process. COVID did put a big spanner in the works there. We had no choice to move to online and newspapers and newsprint advertising. People were able to speak to submissions at the council offices, and I think we did have 1 come in physically. Yeah. which worked fine from my perspective. So the final proposal was a reflection of Council's commitment to Te Tautokoro, to identify with and effectively and fairly represent a local voice, uphold our tītiriti or Waitangi responsibilities in partnership with our tangata whenua, and to take care of the te taio, our natural environment, fulfilling on NRC's vision and mission. So I've added in a little bit more there, but with that, I will finish with one of our favourite proverbs. Toi tū te whenua, toi tū te moana, toi tū te tangata. The land is well, if the sea is well, the people will thrive. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Penny, thank you. We'll just go back to the open. We'll just clear that screen out, please. And get the gallery out. We'll just now go to questions by commissioners. Commissioner Bigham.
Kia ora, Penny. Thank you for that comprehensive presentation. That was really helpful. Can I just touch base on when you talked about TT Mac's preference was for 11 councillors, including 3 Māori. Was that, as far as you're aware, was that preference based on just having more Māori, as many Māori seats as they can under the formula, or was it specifically because they felt the district needed, the region needed more representatives in general?
Kia ora, Benita. Yes, it was my understanding that it was, and what I heard at our TT Mac meeting, that they wanted as many Māori as possible to be around the council table, sharing in that decision making. So yes.
Ka pai. Thank you.
When we did explain our reasoning for it, I don't remember any pushback. It was, but then our TT Mac have a caucus for 2 hours before we, as councillors, meet with them. So perhaps they'd had that sort of debate then, which we're not privy to.
Right, but they weren't. You don't. How do you think they would feel if the commission was to confirm the proposal with 9 and 2, or 9 including 2?
I think it would depend who you talk to a little bit. Yeah, as I said, Peter was quite comfortable with the 9. He's been chair and been on governance groups of large and smaller numbers, so he understood where I think the council were coming from. With staying with 9. Kia ora.
Thank you.
Commissioner Anea.
Just further to Benita's question, I was just wondering, in your engagement with the iwi chairs and hapu, did you go through the options with them and get any kind of formal feedback from them?
The chairs were aware, Ben?
So there's no formal feedback apart from the 2 meetings, one with Ilgase, which was a quick meeting, and then to come.
Sorry, I can't hear very well.
Sorry, I'm just checking the facts here, Janine. Excuse me.
Okay.
There was no formal presentation, like similar to what we've done here, and we had a formal presentation with TTMAC only. Our CEO, our Māori Ilgase CEOs and our iwi leaders chairs, they're so pushed for time that we get a very small window. But I don't remember a specific conversation about alternatives, although I'm pretty sure they were aware of that there was either 11.3 or 9.2.
I'm pretty sure about that.
Well, I could go back and clarify, but
maybe if you could just give that a little bit of attention in your right of reply, that would be really helpful.
Certainly.
Thank you. And I've just got one further question, Brendan, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Just what I didn't see in a lot of your officers' comment is much wrapped around how you developed your understanding of your communities of interest. Can you help me with that? You know, the individual shared issues that help shape those communities.
I'll have to, can I go to you, Ben? Because staff gave us very comprehensive information. Ben, can you remember how we?
I'm happy for you to address that in your right of reply as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Because it would have been in some of the information we've already provided. But we can enlarge on that, certainly.
Thank you.
So can I just first of all make an observation? We've said it to almost every local authority in your presentation. You acknowledge the impact of COVID and how challenging that was in terms of engaging with your community. So respect that and make that acknowledgement as a reflection of that challenge. Look, I just want to focus down on the comment that you made about remuneration and the importance of remuneration to stimulate candidates to stand. And I want to try and drill in because you then made the comment that a whole lot more work is now done online or via Zoom. So I'm trying to understand how, I'm struggling actually to understand how much of an impact or how much of consideration was given to income stream as against delivering service into the community, because I'm getting the sense that income is seen as being important because it's such a big job, but then the commentary is a lot of it's done via Zoom now and we don't have to travel as much. So the arguments are fighting against each other. Can you comment in that space?
Yeah, certainly. I don't necessarily feel it as a conflict there. Just to address the remuneration, the particular councillor had a full-time job with another agency, government agency, and the remuneration had to be comparable for them to consider. Well, they still had to take a dip, but they still had a mortgage to pay. So it had to be give them the ability to still pay their mortgage. But as far as the work online, I was more referring to the work that councillors do when we meet, certainly not the constituency work. I think that cutting down the travel, we're quite a large region, so the travelling time is huge. Like for our councillor from Te Hiku to come down, that's a 3-hour trip, if not longer. For me, coming over from Dargaville, it's an hour and a half by the time I get through traffic. So that extra time to be able to do our council all group work via Zoom is hugely valuable. But then you could also say that once COVID's finished, it gives us that time to be out in our constituencies, talking to our councillors, taking part in the mahi that goes on with our community groups, that sort of thing, going to enviro schools. So I don't actually see them conflicting. Certainly we can meet with constituents online if that's their preference, but it's more just getting out in amongst it that we're able to do if we've got that extra time.
Okay, so in terms of you talked about the size of the population and you suspected the numbers were greater than that which is the number that you've had to use at the moment. So a bigger population, a greater workload, how do you justify maintaining the same number of elected members? So the workload, geographical spread, you just mentioned the distance of travel, time to get to meetings. So as you look forward, I'm just trying to get my head around the driver from the information I've got is the salary to I can't see what the other drivers are to justify 9.
The salary is only one aspect. For me, it's the ability to make.
Yeah, but can I just say that the salary is in fact because it was a leading observation by staff as it's in its advice to council.
Leading. Okay. For me, it was only one aspect. However, I'm not going to necessarily disagree. So the 9, and I am the chair, so I can speak from that role as well as a councillor. I wasn't chair the first term I was there. We make very efficient and effective decisions with 9. You can, if we had any more than that, say 12, it would be an extra quarter of an hour of discussion, which wouldn't necessarily get us any further. You get, and this is my observation, when you have more councillors than 9, you can get fractions forming, which isn't helpful. As far as getting out into our communities, I still think, even with Te Hiku being a large one, Kaipara is a large one for me, I still have, I had as a councillor, plenty of time to get around my constituencies. I could go to the Waipua Forest, that's an hour's drive, and it's still only an hour's drive to Mangataroto. So I was able to get to any function that I needed to. And I have been this term as well, even as chair. Admittedly, that there haven't been that many because of COVID.
Commissioner Bigham.
Chair, do you mind if I address that from a management?
Sorry, Brendan, could Malcolm just address that too, please?
Okay, and then we'll go to Commissioner Bigham.
Sorry, Chair, could I just address the remuneration issue from a management perspective as opposed to a governance perspective? I think the remuneration is hugely important because if I just reflect over the decade that I've been chief executive, my first council, there was a huge differential between the chair's salary being full-time and then the councillors' salaries, and that's been addressed over time. But the two major factors is, if until we got the current arrangement with the Remunerations Authority, where all our councillors get the same remuneration, we were sitting with a situation that the vast majority of our councillors had to have a second form of income, and we're working either on a full-time or part-time basis as well. And that often conflicted with the times that we needed them available for their governance roles, and quite severely impacted on our ability to get decisions made promptly and efficiently with all the councillors present. So we often used to have to make decisions with, maybe only 5 or 6 councillors in the room, and 2 or 3 having work commitments that they were not able to attend. That led to a whole heap of inefficiency, because what was happening is that those decisions were being relitigated then when the councillors that had missed the meetings came back into the room. So ever since we've been able to move to a position where councillors are all remunerated equally, we've had a very much higher attendance rate than traditionally, and that has improved the quality of decision making around the council table considerably. I think the second factor that I think is really important that the Commission should consider is this issue of being able to get younger people around the council table. If I can reflect, my first council was virtually entirely retired males, or males that had quite substantial businesses that they could afford to be away from because they had managers that ran the business. We now have a council that is well balanced from a gender point of view. We've got a far broader range of age around the council table than we had traditionally. My first council, I don't know the numbers exactly, but I would guess the average age was in their late 60s, early 70s. Our average age around our council today would more than likely be in our 50s, with our youngest member, I don't know if she's 30 or 40, but 30, I imagine 30. So we've been able to, by being able to address the remuneration issue, we've been able to, in fact, improve the level of democracy around the table in terms of the representation of the range of of our society is more represented around our council table today than it has ever been before. So if I can just say from a management perspective, it's really important to be able to remunerate councillors well, and then in return, we expect them to commit the time that is equivalent to that remuneration.
Okay, thanks, Malcolm.
Thank you, Malcolm. And I would just add another thought that I had over the weekend when I was reviewing this is that, I think councillors or people that are interested in local government are much more attracted to a smaller board, 9 compared to 14. You're going to get the professionals that you need on councils now to stand up for the job. Because it's a council of 9, and we all know that 9 is an efficient number for any board or any council. So that's my perspective. I wouldn't necessarily personally be looking at going on a council that has 14 members.
Okay, we'll go to Commissioner Bigham, and then we'll go to Commissioner Inier.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair. An interesting conversation around the remuneration, and unfortunately that's the way it is across the country, just as a bit of a statement rather than a question. We're all fighting the same battles in terms of trying to get good people to the table. My question, unfortunately not being as au fait as I would like to be with the beautiful North, is around, you referenced, Penny, being able to travel in your ward across various distances. I'm just reflecting on the Māori constituency with the 2 members. What would the driving time be for those people, east to west, north to south, to cover the whole rohe for those 2 people? So how long does it take to drive from the bottom of your district to your rohe to the top, and from both coast to coast?
Yeah, probably from top to bottom it would be potentially 5 hours. Yeah, and from west to east it would be 1-2 hours.
Okay, thank you. And your reference earlier to the 50-50 urban-rural split, obviously most of the urban is centred around Whangarei, that would be correct?
Correct, yeah.
What's the rural landscape like? Is it difficult driving? Are there good roads? A lot of population put on.
Sorry. So I think Northland is we pride ourselves that we've got probably the worst roads in New Zealand. However, we have got state highways that work. So we have a lot of trucks. We have a lot of logging up here. So there's occasionally you get caught behind a truck, but most of the time I find it okay. I travel State Highway 14 from Dargaville to Whangarei. It's not great, but it's certainly drivable. You get used to it.
Ka pai. Thank you.
Commissioner Inier.
Oh, you've just gone back on mute.
You're on mute, Janie.
There we go. Am I right now?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, can you explain to me, just as part of that earlier question with the communities of interests that I asked, there's not a lot of commentary in the backing notes of the current Hokianga and Kaikoui constitutions and their makeup, and whether they are appropriately divided between the proposed Far North and Kaipara general consistent constituencies. So just a little bit of a comment on that would be really helpful with the community of interest question. Thank you. Oh, just in following up a little bit from Benita's question, are you proposing any extra support for those councillors, Māori and the other general constituencies that have very large geographical areas?
Certainly the Māori elected members will get a large amount of support depending on how much they need, of course, but there will be a serious induction period. There will be staff available for them, and and there'll be constant communication, probably extra communication with the chair and there may be a Maori ward chair, but yeah, there will be a considerable amount of time and effort put into making sure that the Maori ward members are sufficiently supported. We do already make extra resources available to our, as far as time goes, for our Te Hiku, and Kaipara is not so bad for me. I feel quite confident that I can handle the area size, but certainly the Te Hiku member stays overnight in Whangarei most weeks when he was coming down pre-COVID, gets a bit of extra support from staff, that sort of thing. So well aware that there's differences there between travel times and energy needed.
Thank you.
So the last question, because we'll need to go to our appellant, but given the changes that you've proposed for the boundary changes, I'm just going to find the right screen, there you are, the boundary changes, and given the level of engagement that has been able to occur, especially appreciating impacted by COVID, are you comfortable that your community understands those new boundary changes and believes they give fair and effective representation? Are you comfortable as a council, not as a chair, as a council?
Yes, I think.
Yeah. I suppose the problem is how can you show that?
Well, for most communities, there's not a terrifically huge change in my view.
Okay.
And I think, you know, going back to the online accessibility, we have a governance structure where we have working parties that have specific areas. So bearing in mind that when we are at the council table, we represent every part of Northland. And we have, you know, for instance, our climate change working party has a chair, and we put out lots of information from our working party work projects and programs, so that people know that they can go to that chair as well. It doesn't have to be their representative. So that's my, I don't know whether anyone else is, I am confident, yes, that it won't be a huge change for communities, and that they are well aware of it. Certainly, we heard from some Mangakaramia constituents that they were a little bit not upset, but they questioned moving into the Kaipara constituency. But like I say, we're regional councils are different. We're all one. You know, it's not so divided between. We have different issues to district councils, so it's all about the environment. So it doesn't necessarily matter where you are or who you are. It's all about the environment, and we're all in it together. I am aware that we didn't address the Hokianga Kaikoui question from Janine, was it? Ben, I was going to ask you, I know I've got some notes on it, but I can't put my finger on them. Can you just...
I think that's coming up in the right of reply.
Yeah, I was happy for it to be in the right of reply.
Oh, okay, all right.
It gives you plenty of time, Penny, because we'll have a break, and yeah. Don't put Ben under too much stress.
I was ready to go.
Right. Look, I think we'll consider that part of the process is done, and so Penny Langley will now introduce. We'll bring Oliver
Yes.
in, and
Yes.
as an appellant, please.
And I'll just take this opportunity as well to say hello to Margaret. Margaret, we can't hear you at the moment, but I can see that you are there. So just hang tight, and after we've heard from Oliver, we'll come back to you. So just because Margaret doesn't have the benefit of being able to see us all, she's just on the telephone call, wanted to make that comment, and I'll bring Oliver in with us now.
Okay, and commissioners, if you go to page 45. Kia ora, Oliver.
Kia ora and good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today.
Fantastic. You've seen the process, so we're in your hands.
Thank you. So my appeal is clear, so I won't repeat that here, but I'd rather like to use my time to provide some personal experiences. At the time of the local government elections in 2019, I was an utterly frustrated and angry voter. The incumbents in my own district council ward were both climate change deniers who had voted against council's declaration of the climate emergency in July 2019. And I felt something else was needed. And so I decided to run for council myself. And the campaigning brought me into closer contact with many of the other candidates, including the ones from Northland Regional Council. At the time, there were 2 candidates in my NRC constituency. Unfortunately, both of them what I would call the pale, stale male type. The incumbent didn't seem to be very motivated. The challenger had some weird views, including an alternative interpretation of what carbon emissions are. And I didn't really feel like voting for either of them. But as a candidate myself, I also met some NRC candidates from the other constituencies at the campaigning events in town, and really liked some of the new faces and their fresh thinking and their views that aligned with my own. But there was no way for me to vote for them. In my own campaign, I experienced a similar thing. While I didn't stand a chance in my own ward, I was running for the district council at the time. And in the end, I lost miserably because of the demographic in my ward. People I met at campaign meetings in the Whangarei urban wards, as well as online, told me, hey, I would vote for you if only I could. On the other hand, there were 2 NRC constituencies with only 1 candidate each, who were thus elected unopposed. There was no campaigning, no contest of ideas, no democratic process at all. So I'm afraid that I firmly reject NRC's position that representation by constituency on the general roll is still the most effective model. I think this view is anchored in geography and a need for face-to-face, citing reasonable access to and easily attend meetings for councillors in the representation review documentation, but without elaborating what that means. It ignores the significant progress that we've made since the pandemic in meeting and collaborating virtually, which at least for me has actually increased my interest and my participation because it provides me with direct access to people and to projects outside my own parish. Also for the new Maori constituency, Te Raki in NRC, NRC chose the region-wide model with 2 councillors because Maori representation by constituency was seen as too complex initially and required more understanding first. The challenges and the tasks ahead require all the talent and passion we can get. If I'm artificially constrained as a voter to choose between dairy farmer John and dairy farmer Barry, just because they both live nearby and both know the best time and place, when and where to go fishing, then I might not even bother in October 2022 if I get to vote at all, and it's not just a single candidate in my constituency. But if I can choose from a pool of 10 or 15 or even 20 region-wide candidates up to 7 that represent me and my views best, then I'm game. And I don't care if they all live in the same apartment block in town. Councillors can be equally effective by building relationships with the community groups, with iwi, with hapu, who contribute specific knowledge about their areas. And because I was able to listen in earlier, let me just insert here that NRC is all about the environment, and Chair Smart said it herself. It's not necessarily so much about a particular area, it's more about the challenges that the regional councils face. Now, when WDC, the Whangarei District Council, went through a representation review of their own, they started this with a survey, which provided inconclusive results. For example, most people viewed the whole district as their community of interest and didn't think their wards reflected that. Yet they also wanted to keep the wards and their structure. That result is certainly not directly transferable to Northland Regional Council, but it shows that a large number of people now think further than their own patch, while still being reluctant to let go of the old system. Now, WDC has ultimately decided to elect at large in the general ward to support that trend. And if for nothing else but consistency with the district council and with the new Teraki Maori constituency and the more choices and options it provides, I urge NRC to please adopt the same. In conclusion, I think local government is in dire straits. We have mayors and regional council chairs who are climate change deniers, anti-vaxxers who are slowly losing their marbles, who are opposing water reforms while regularly dishing out boil water notices. We have councils that suffer from serious infighting or even completely broke down and were replaced by commissioners. In many instances, these problems are caused or exacerbated by incumbents that are stuck in the past, but advantaged by the system, by the current system. So please give us voters more options, more access to diversity, and increase the voter turnout by breaking down these old barriers to representation. Thank you so much for listening.
Good, Oliver. Thank you for those observations and very succinct presentation as well. Really appreciate that. I'll just go to commissioners just to check in if there's any questions. So Commissioner Anea and then Commissioner Bigham.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Just one question. For those constituents in the very isolated areas away from the large population areas, do you see any potential disadvantages to them?
In the old model, definitely. We heard about traveling times. We heard about how the situation in Northland is, the distances some people have to drive. However, I think that the pandemic has shown us that we can do at least some of the work differently, and we need to embrace that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that someone who represents the constituency has to have a firmly established base there or a firmly put down roots there or any particular personal knowledge. We can work together on this. We can gather the information from the people on the ground, from the remotest corners of Northland, and make sure they are properly heard and properly represented. That doesn't have to be a local farmer or a local businessman with roots in that particular area. And some of those constituencies are so large and have one councillor in the end that will be elected according to the current representation model. That guy couldn't represent every corner of his or her constituency anyway properly, because yeah, you could always say, oh yeah, you are from over here, you don't speak for us people who live over there. So I give you that the large constituencies have issues with getting everywhere, but I think we have learned the hard way, but also in a good way, that we can do a lot of things better by using modern communication tools and by not needing to do everything ourselves, but connecting with community groups, bringing them in and making sure that their voices are heard.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bigham.
Kia ora, Oliver. Thank you for your presentation this morning. Just coming back to your concerns around lack of candidates standing for specific constituencies and how you might think, you know, is the community in a position to be able to lobby other potential candidates? It's that almost, I'm just wondering, do you see that sitting as a problem for the council to have to address, or is that a problem that the community needs to address and not getting more candidates to stand in those constituencies rather than changing the whole voting system?
It's an excellent question, and it's a bit unfair to point the finger squarely at councils for that, because the problem is, of course, also the lack of interest, the low voter turnout, and general being disenfranchised with the system. So people, when I decided to stand, I did this out of frustration because I did not feel that the incumbents and the other candidates that had put their hand up would represent me. So for me, it was the motivation to basically get someone into council who aligns with my views myself. You're right. There would actually have to be a stronger drive from the communities themselves. I'm just not sure if we can already ask for that in 2022. So one of the reasons for my appeal is that we might have to provide the larger pool and the greater diversity with a representation model that goes wider, that goes district, or in that case, region-wide, just to provide more options and provide people who, like me in 2019, would say, okay, this is like voting between Trump and Clinton. I don't like either of them. What am I going to do? Do I even bother? Do I make a tick or not? Give people like me who were in that situation, the opportunity to tick up to 7 boxes for people that align with our views, even if they live at the other end of Northland. As we said earlier, it's mostly about environmental tasks. There's a lot of stuff to do ahead of us. So having the right people on council is more important to me than having local people on council. So it's more around the abilities, the capabilities, the experience, the passion of those people, rather than being from a particular patch, being well known, being well established in a particular corner of Northland. And that should also be driven by the community, but I'm not sure if we can ask the communities this time around to provide that, particularly also because of the 2 years of COVID. I think we may have to open that up from the council end by adopting a model like WADC has done with a large pool of candidates that work region-wide.
Thank you. That's an excellent response. Kia ora.
Brilliant, Oliver. Thank you very much for the time you've given and setting the preparation into your presentation. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate that I was given the time to speak here today. Very, very happy that I have the opportunity. Thank you.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Stay safe.
Ka kite. So we are now going to call on Margaret Penny Langley. I don't usually say
that's
Penny
right.
Langley, but there are two, so we just want to be sure we get it right.
I will now click the button at this end, which will hopefully allow Margaret to speak to us. Okay, so Margaret, you are now in the meeting with us. At your end, we need you to bring yourself off mute. And I believe the best way to do that is on your telephone keys, if you can push *6, and that should give you the opportunity to talk to us. I'll just give you a minute to do that.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Hello?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, good. Oh, good morning, everybody. Well, as you know from my previous submissions, I actually oppose the present Northland Council's proposed voting arrangements, as despite introducing 2 Maori seats, which incidentally, of course, I support, it has not solved the major problem of the failure of most voters to participate in the local body elections. Last time, only 42% voted, thereby making every single councillor a minority councillor that most of the electorate didn't even support. So how do we solve this problem? Certainly, I do not see that by reducing the existing number of councillors by 2 to accommodate the Maori seats will help. any more than altering the constituency boundaries is likely to make a difference. As you know, you've heard comments on that already. Yet, hopefully, Maori, who in the past have not voted in great numbers, will now make more of an effort. But even here, their contribution is unlikely to make much difference, since many live in isolated areas in the far north and have little or no access to the internet. And this is where I come on the main problem. Indeed, as I see it, the regional council's sole concentration on the use of the internet is the main stumbling block to increase voter participation. I mean, if Northland was like the main centres of population, such as we find in Auckland, Christchurch, Dunedin, etc., it would be a different matter. But it isn't. Northland has a very scattered population, with only relatively small concentrations of residents in Whangarei, Kerikeri, Dargaville, Mangawhai, for example. Some residents don't even have access to mains electricity, let alone a computer. So to make one's voting arrangements totally dependent upon computer access is unrealistic and therefore undemocratic. You know, I have to wonder if this is a deliberate intention of the regional council by reducing the numbers of would-buy voters. It's certainly a very insidious way to sabotage the democratic process. After all, it excludes other means of communication when publicising the lead-up to a local body election. Last year, for example, when the council was organising consultation on the proposed electoral processes, can you tell me what was the point of a Zoom Hui when a number of voters obviously couldn't participate even if they wanted to? What is the point of organising market meetings and publishing dates and times on the council's website when, once again, some residents are not connected to the internet? Moreover, let's face it, not all those connected to the internet anyway actually check out the council's website. Now, for democracy to be effective, I was under the impression that everybody has to participate, and what's more, has to understand the issues involved. Now, how on earth can this happen under the present NRC's present arrangements? Oh, no doubt primarily the middle class will check their internet, as will vested interests such as developers, industry, farmers and the like. But a substantial section of the population will automatically be excluded because for various reasons they will not access the internet. Of course, this will make work much easier for the regional council if numbers are reduced as a result of concentrating on computer access. It will make it much easier to organise the lead-up to a local election, but it will not serve a democratic process. There has to be a complete change in the culture of the Northland Regional Council. It has to understand that the internet is not the sole means of communication at the exclusion of everything else, especially when publicising the lead-up to a local body election. After all, the internet has its limitations. It can be hacked, subject to myths and disinformation, and can entirely break down as a result of a solar flare. Other means of communication not only have to be considered, they have to be implemented. The only way Council can achieve a truly democratic local body election is by not only using every means of communication at its disposal, that is radio, TV, newspaper, pamphlet, public meetings, etc., but by also involving the public far more than at present in its operations. It's not only by making people feel that they are not just part of Northland, but are also part of the Northland Regional Council's activities, that they will vote in numbers. Otherwise, we are in danger of reducing democracy to nothing more than a farce. Sadly, as I see it, unless the regional council makes some major changes but continues under its existing system, it is guaranteed to fail in markedly improving the voter turnout. And I might comment here that councillors have got to get around far more their constituencies and speak to local groups than just concentrating on a centralised meeting. That's just not good enough. The communication systems have to be far more extensive. It is the failure of council and councillors to communicate with the body of people that is why we have so few people taking part in the elections at present. Something has to change.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you for those observations. Just stay on the line if you don't mind, because there's a couple of commissioners that would like to ask you some questions as well. And Commissioner Bigham is going to ask you the first question.
Kia ora, Margaret. Thank you for your time. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
Great. Thank you very much. And can I just commend you on your penmanship? It was a beautiful penmanship, so it's lovely to see. Certainly easier to read than mine. Margaret, you talked about the council's use of the internet for voting. Are you aware that that's not actually how votes are conducted in the elections? So votes are still at this stage sent out by postal means.
Well, I agree. The actual voting system when we actually vote is not on the internet. But what I'm commenting is it's the lead up to it, all the meetings, all the discussions and everything that take place in council are now solely on the internet. We don't have meetings. We don't do a great deal on the press. Some time ago, we stopped even using the council public letter that used to be distributed in everybody's letterbox, which was a way of communicating issues with people, but that stopped. And if you are only going to concentrate on the internet as your means of communication, you are automatically going to cut out a large section of the community.
Thank you, Margaret. That's very helpful. So can I just also ask, if I may, in the council's right of reply, that they're able, I know you mentioned earlier, team, about the methods by which you had communicated to the community, and I know you included Māori radio. Can you just please also provide some clarification around any other methods that you used apart from the your Zoom hui, which Margaret's also mentioned, and the attendance at the marketplaces? It will be interesting to see what else you've done in that space. Those are all the questions I have, Margaret. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Commissioner. Margaret, there's no other questions from commissioners, so thank you very much for the work and effort that you've put in, and along with Commissioner Bigham, I wish I could write like you. Fantastic. Thank you, Margaret.
And I'll just pop you back to where you were before, Margaret, so we won't be able to hear you from now on.
Right, okay, so we're not too bad for time. So Chair Penny, we now need to take a break. The plan was that we were to complete this session at 10 o'clock, so we're only about 20 minutes behind. So you'll need just bear with me, the screen going, I can see everybody. You'll need some time for the right of reply and also time for a cup of tea. Is 25 minutes enough, or do we want to hold out till 11 o'clock? How long do you guys need, do you think? Do you want to hold out?
Yes, if we could go to 11. Thank you, Brendan. Can you just clarify whether you want answers to all the questions that have been sent through from Linda, I think it was.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, so essentially what Linda has done is noted, as we've gone through all the various questions that we've sought to come back in the right of reply. So she's got them recorded, flip them through to you guys, have a chew on them, do the best that you can to respond to those particular points, and then articulate them in the right of reply at 11 o'clock. There's no more questioning from us. Oh, well, there might be one, but I doubt it very much. Essentially, we're done with the questioning. The right of reply comes in, then we take those responses, and then we'll go away and do our deliberations. That's essentially the process from here.
Okay, thank you.
All righty. So Penny Langley will just give us the detail of what happens now, and we'll adjourn and come back at 11 o'clock. But just give us the rundown, Penny, please.
Sure. So just to let everybody know that our live stream will continue through the duration of the break. So if everyone can switch off their videos and pop themselves on mute, that would be good. If you want to, for any reason, leave the meeting, then you just come back in exactly the same way that you did at the beginning. So that's pretty much all you need to know. And I just pop a wee slide up to let anyone who's watching our live stream know that we're taking a break.
Now, just before everybody goes, so commissioners, I don't think we need a ring in, do we? No. So we'll just take a break and we'll come back for 11 o'clock. Okay. Thanks, everybody. We're adjourned. We're looking pretty good. 1, 2, we're all here. Okay, so there you go. It's 11 o'clock, we can reconvene. And so Chair Penny will pass back to you for your right of reply.
Kia ora koutou, just unmuting. Thank you for inviting us back. So we have had some questions sent through. Thank you, Linda. So we'll go through them from 1 till 4. So we just thought it would be an idea to take you through what our TTMAC group actually is, our Te Tautokoro Māori Advisory Group. So it's co-chaired. So there is a non-elected member, Peter Tiffany, who co-chairs with one of our councillors, Marty Robinson. It's been going for 8 years. It started in 2013. It was initiated by Dovey Samuels. It's evolved over the years really well. It started off as being somewhat operational, but now it's fully up in the governance sphere. It's made up of iwi, hapu and whānau, and there's 21 members. It's geographically spread, and all the non-elected TTMAC members are mandated by their iwi, hapu, iwi or hapu. All councillors attend the TTMAC meetings. They're bi-monthly formal meetings, and we have moved to having workshop huis the alternate month. Prior to that, we were meeting on marae, but COVID, as it is, has made that very difficult, if not impossible. Ilgase is the iwi chairs CEOs and the Te Tautokoro CEOs, as well as support staff. So they meet, how often is it, Tim? Quarterly. Those are very good at huis as well. And then there is the Te Kahua Tonui Iwi Leaders Forum, which we have met with over the last term or couple of terms, intermittently, admittedly, and as I said, they are very busy, but we do, as mayors and chair, have meetings with Harry Burkhardt, who is the chair of the iwi Leaders Forum as well. So that's sometimes in other forums, but it's a good, I can ring Harry whenever I want to, and he can ring me. So anything else about those forums?
Do we just want to touch on the depth of the conversation with the TMAC?
Oh, throughout the representation review?
Yeah.
Yep. So we had several meetings with several of our meetings had TTMAC the representation review on the agenda. Initially, it was all about Maori wards. And once that decision was made by council, fully supported by TTMAC, we moved on to how it was going to look. So we had 3 presentations, staff and councillor presentations to TTMAC to get their feedback, and only post them were our decisions made.
Also, we had 2 formal meetings. Do you want to talk about the EWCs as well too?
Sorry, yes.
Formal papers as well there too.
Yeah, so the Ilgase meeting, the options were Maori constituencies, including possible numbers. There was feedback given on those. The main feedback that we did get was that the ultimate aim is 50-50 representation, so that full partnership. Yeah, so we have certainly taken that on board as well, because it's something we hear from our TTMAC members as well. And we've got another work stream that's addressing that at the moment.
Can I just say, sorry, just in backing that up, so formal papers were taken because the council chief executives and the iwi chief executives do meet regularly quarterly. Formal papers were taken, one in September 2020 to confirm that we were going into that process around representation review, and then back and we represented all across the councils, another paper as well too around the options for each of those councils, because the main feedback as well too from chief executives is please try and be cohesive if you're going to come and ask us about what works in terms of representation. But again, backing up what Penny said, overall, they saw it as a step in the right direction, but not 50-50, not true partnership. So those were some of the formal papers we took over the period of time.
Chair, maybe if I could just add to that, because I think it was Commissioner Bingham asked the question around 2 verse 3 Maori seats and whether there was a strong view on that. And I think the priorities that were spelled out very clearly to us was the first step was about seats at the table. Just being at the decision-making table was the highest priority. The next highest priority was 50% representation at council. And really the question of 2 verse 3 was a side issue because it didn't meet the second requirement. So there was an acknowledgement that getting the seats ticked the first box, and the second box is still there to be debated and to be dealt with, and that is 50-50 representation.
And just to add to that, if we, the new figures that come out for the next, not this election this year, but the following one, we should have more accurate figures as to the makeup of Māori in Te Tai Tokoro, which will be over that 30%. So one would think that we'd get, if we had 9 councillors, 3 of those would be Māori. So if I can move on to the next question, which was all about communities of interest, and apologies if we haven't, or if I haven't articulated this well enough. I will ask Malcolm and Ben and Oriel to help me out with this one now. So in 2017, we had a representation review, a full one of all our communities, and we took those 3 PO very seriously for representation, effective and fair representation, and we did it. We went out and we consulted a lot on it, both staff and councillors, and we got a really good indication of where our community sat. So going into this representation review, we were reasonably confident that we had most of it well set, but we realised we could have a look at making some changes. So where am I up to? So the Mid-North one was to get, it was sort of bitsy. It needed to be one constituency. They had a lot of things in common, that group. They weren't coastal and they weren't urban. They were made up of lifestylers and rural. And we wanted to really give them the opportunity to have a voice as a community of interest. So that was behind that one. Any further comments from?
Yeah, Chair, if I may, just to add to the question around the creation of what's essentially a rural constituency in the Mid-North. I mean, the one, largely our larger population centres are on the coast, and they stay within the constituency that they have been for at least the last 2 rotations. The one failing that we had with the current model was that because the coastal communities had the large population, they essentially drowned out the voice of our rural community. So one of the really objectives of this was to try and give voice to that 50% of our community. Now, clearly it's not 50% in that, but to give voice to the rural community by having a constituency that didn't have a coastal community or coastal urban area in it. And that's one of the major changes really between the previous model and the current model that's being proposed. The second element, and I'm going to hand to Oriel to describe it in a bit more detail, is we had 2 major drivers. Is where there's small tweaks to boundaries, we look to try and move towards either catchment boundaries or iwi rohe boundaries, so that we were over time getting closer and closer to the reflection of the iwi rohes. And that's going to be a work in progress over a number of years, because a major portion of our iwi are settled, but Ngāpuhi and a number of the other larger iwi are not settled yet. Those boundaries will still solidify over time. So I think if I ask Oriel just to talk to the iwi boundaries that we took into consideration when coming up with a current proposal.
Yeah, I think, and so there's two areas there. There's two iwi there, Te Rarawa, where they have boundaries that encompass the areas beginning from Hokianga. It's eastwards following the Hokianga River to Manga Taipa, and then at the base of Maunga Taniwha, there's ranges that follow the Pāmapuria River. And of course, the Te Rarawa cultural experts would give more depth and expertise to that. But so there is a tribal boundary there that makes sense for that area. The other one that comes into here is Te Roroa, also another settled iwi. So they have forest south country in the Hokianga that then starts to show some natural places of interest for those two boundary areas. And as Malcolm's talked to, there's also Ngāpuhi. So Ngāpuhi around the Kaikohe mid-north, then when you're coming into Kawakawa or Teria, all that area there, that's Ngāti Hime. And those areas still to be settled underneath that, or the many hapu that have claims still to be settled. So there is some from the settled iwi, potentially some very clear supporting to create this Mid-North Hokianga constituency that would help to support eventually iwi boundaries or rohe boundaries. So those are some important points that do make sense around particularly this Mid-North Hokianga area.
I'm just going to intervene here just for a moment. These two answers, Malcolm, your observations, and then Aurelia, your commentary are crucial. They are really, really, really important. So I just want to take our time there, because you've nailed the guts of what we're trying to get our heads around. So the commentary around that separation from the rural and the coastal, fairly reflecting fair and effective representation, and the additional comment around the work in progress to reflect iwi boundaries, equally as important for us to understand, because as we make our decision, we've got to justify it, we've got to quantify it as well. Those two comments you've just made are now solidifying our understanding about where you are, you might remember that question I asked ages ago, how sure are you? This is helpful. So don't hold back in your explanations in this space. And I am going to go to a question which I wouldn't usually do, but it is important. So I will ask Commissioner Bigham just to fire in here, because we're at a crucial point here.
Thank you, Brendan. Actually, my first question was, am I allowed to ask a question? So thank you, appreciate that. Kia ora koutou, just in terms of participation of settled iwi versus non-settled iwi at this stage, is there any difference in ability to participate regardless of settlements?
Happy to answer that.
Yep.
Do you want to answer?
Yeah, so there's no difference in terms of the non-elected participation in TTMAC. So the way TTMAC was originally established 8 years ago was that we firstly wrote to the 11 iwi inviting them each to put up a member. And then when some of them took up the offer to create TTMAC and some didn't, and for the seats that remained, we then offered those seats to Hapu members that came from that iwi to get the spread. That then led to the integration of both iwi and Hapu sitting at the same table, which up north was quite an issue at the time, and quite unusual to have iwi and Hapu sitting at the same table, because it tended to be either iwi table or a Hapu table, and you didn't mix them. And that culture is actually really developed and is part of the strength of TTMAC now, and has been embedded in TTMAC. So in some cases where an iwi might have 2 seats or 3 seats at TTMAC, effectively they take up one themselves, and the other 2 they will give, 1 or 2 they will give to members of Hapu that associate with that iwi. So we've really been able to maintain that culture of having both iwi and Hapu sitting at the same table giving the advice.
Okay.
And that's regardless of whether the iwi is settled or not.
Yeah.
Regardless, yeah. So,
Okay.
so the invitation originally went to every single iwi, regardless if they were settled or not. And it was for them to decide whether they wish to take up the seat or not.
Okay, thank you for the clarity, and back to you, Chair Penny.
Thank you. So just to add on to the kōrero around the Hokianga Kaikoai constituency, the bit that has been placed into the Kaipara constituency is relatively small. Okay, we can bring a map up if that's helpful. This area that has gone into the Kaipara is part of the Kaipara catchment. So that makes sense from that perspective.
Can I just before you carry on, a quick explanation of what's shown on the screen, and then they'll be able to contextualize that with what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm just going to move up and grab the mouse. So the green area here is the far north, the proposed far north constituency. We've got the Kaipara one down here in the kind of a bluey color, and then the mid-north here. Now the other lines you can see, so this is the line here, is the existing constituencies. Okay, so the line I'm following with my mouse here is the existing Hokianga Kaikoai constituency. So what you can see here is that the lion's share of that constituency is being proposed to attach and go in essentially into the far north. You've got this area in here, which will go into mid-north, and you've got the small area down here, which will go into the Kaipara.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. Great clarity. Thank you.
And I think with the far north, or Te Hiku, being that 50-50 split between Maori and European, my strong hope is that we will definitely get one Maori ward out of that, or one Maori elected member out of that far north area, which will certainly help the Te Hiku general elected member. And there was one other point. Oh yes, so NRC have intentionally got a plan of spreading ourselves out into the regions as far as our offices go. So we've got 5 offices which can support councillors as well as constituents, of course, but it's working well for us having that geographical spread. Our staff, and to a lesser extent, but still an extent, and councillors are well involved in our communities. So they're out there every day, and they have a very good feel for which communities of interest are best suited to be in specific areas. And that certainly informed our 2017 representation review as well as it did this one. Okay, so if that question's hopefully covered,
Thank you.
we'll move on to 3, which was the Hokianga Kaikoe. And then that just leaves number 4, which is about our communication. So as I said, there was a lot, but I'm going to hand over to our other members around the table just to be able to give you some intimate detail as to what it was.
Ben, do you want to, can you just clear that screen now?
Yeah, sure.
Please. We don't
Yep.
need that now, do we?
No.
So Chair, if I may, by way of just opening comment before I hand to the team to give some of the detail, I think in developing the communications plan for this, I'm happy to acknowledge that from a management perspective, we provided advice and clearly articulated the need to try and get to those parts of our community that traditionally don't involve themselves in elections. So there was a strong focus on talking to Maori through Maori channels to promote the participation and hopefully see the low turnout improved by getting more Maori participation in the voting, and then also by focusing on our youth. And a lot of our internet and video links and so on and social media activity was particularly focused on the youth vote. So that there was a clear strategy in that regard. Can I also, just while I'm talking before I get, there was the question from Mrs. Hicks about the public letter, but just if I can clarify that one. Council traditionally used to send out a letter, a newsletter to the community that we sent and placed in individuals' postal boxes. As part of our One Voice program to demonstrate greater unification and unity between the councils, the decision was taken some 6 or 8 years ago to include that newsletter in the rates bill. So that letter now goes out with the rates bill as opposed to going just into general post boxes. So it's not that we've stopped sending it out, it's just the delivery method has changed.
Thank you for that.
I'll just then hand over to Ben and Oriel about the detail of the comms plan.
Just in regards to the targeted approach for tangata whenua, iwi and hapu, we did have a social procurement process where we looked to engage a company that provided advice for our comms team. And so that certainly did help us to understand directly, because of the issues for queer kaumata being online, but because of the environment now, they are much more savvy and much more able to engage through those channels very easily.
Mm-hmm.
And just a little bit to add to me, one of the other issues that we were having to deal with our communications is we'd obviously just got off the back of the whole debate and a very public debate around Māori seats. And so our communications was, I guess, around managing that a bit as well, going into this next phase. In terms of, and I'll sort of focus on the non-online stuff, communications. So we're do the usual all in the papers. So we had communications in our papers, but we did, there was a real strong radio push in radio. And we talked a little bit around the emphasis on the Māori radio. And so all of our major Māori stations up here, we pushed in that. But we also went through the more mainstream as well. So we were there with like, you know, The Sound and Midget Talk and More FM. So we covered the spectrum when it came to our radio communications on it.
You want to list the papers that we...
Yeah. So up here, we've got like the Kaipula Lifestyler, we've got the Whangarei Leader, we've got the Northern News, Bay Chronicle, etc. And what else have we got? The Northland Age and the Northland Advocate. And those papers that we go into cover about 100,000 or so. That's the readership of those spread of papers.
Our videos were also, we had Mike Kake, who was one of our TTMAC Hapu representatives and one of our councillors as well too. So we wanted to really focus on showing the partnership approach, given what was happening through that time. We also too important, the other councillors were looking at campaigns as well too. So there's a lot of concerted effort up here in Northland around maintaining a positive approach.
Okay, thank you. Chair Penny, is that you? Is that it?
Yep. Yes, thank you.
So can we just talk about
Just
the
one-
representation?
Oh, yeah, you've got some. Yeah, you've got some additional people want to speak.
Represent everyone and not constituencies, and that functionally we have councillors. Chair, so just want to, just in response to Oliver's comments around some of the representation issues, one of the cultural issues that this council has worked very hard on is the one that we, even although elected members are voted in by constituency because that's the way the law requires, the councillor oath that they take on day one is that they represent the entire region. They don't represent their constituency. We put a lot of emphasis on that. And in fact, our entire governance structure is developed around that so that each councillor has functional responsibility for something across the entire region. So if I can name names and use examples, Councillor MacDonald is responsible for climate change for the entire region. Councillor Crowe is responsible for biosecurity and biodiversity for the entire region. Councillor Blakey is responsible for economic development for the entire region. And all of our work is focused on that regional perspective. So while I acknowledge some of the frustrations that we heard from Oliver, I put it to the commissioners that many of his comments were related to TA issues, and this council has worked hard to develop a different culture and a different way of working.
Thanks, Malcolm.
Thank you, Malcolm. And just to add to that, if we were to go to at large, we would, we know that 50% of our population is pretty much whangarei. We would get a whangarei-centric council, and to be honest, we've been accused of that regardless of what we do. It's certainly dissipated in the last 2 terms that I've been on there because of what Malcolm said and because of the way we work. As a council, it's critically important that we have people within Rohis to be able to feed into council table what's going on there. And then, of course, we see it as a regional response. But in order to get that fair representation and effective representation, you have to have councillors out there in those Rohis to know what's going on and to be seen by the general public. Certainly any media releases that we put out, if at all possible, that particular councillor is mentioned in that in the area where the media release is concerned. And as a chair, I certainly do not hold the media limelight at all. It's a very flat hierarchical system that I prefer.
Okay, right. I think we can consider that process done. And as I say, we don't go back into questions on the right of reply, except for our temporary commissioner, Commissioner Bigham, who has a style all of her own, which you saw yet again. She broke the rules. No, she didn't at all. It was absolutely the right thing to do. So look, just in conclusion, there's a couple of observations that I'd like to make. The first one is to reflect here as a local authority The challenge of COVID, I made the comment earlier on, but I do make it again on the record, that has not been easy. And engaging with communities over the last 18 months in this environment has created way more challenges than any local authority would be comfortable with. And there wouldn't be too many around the country that could really and truly say that they've had the most, the most amazing engagement. Our reality is that it's been a challenge, and we acknowledge here that in the circumstances you've done the best that you could. So we want to. I think it's really important to reflect on that. To you, Malcolm, as CE, the backroom team, and obviously you've got Oriel and Ben there, but you'll have others as well that have worked tirelessly in the background, supporting your organisation to go through this process. Equally as important to the commission team in the back room, trying to set up these Zooms are not easy, and using technology in this day and age has been a challenge for some of us, but we've managed to get there. So I do want to say thank you to you and your team for getting us here today. And you would have seen there that Margaret coming in on the phone. Doesn't have the computer connections. We still seem to somehow be able to make this all work and give everybody a fair go. And I think you'll agree that's occurred today. So those are my concluding comments. It'd be lovely though for you may choose to close with your karakia, Chair Penny or Oriel. I'll leave it in your hands to close us out.
Thank you, Brendan, and thank you very much for your for leading us through today, and to all the commissioners and your backup staff as well. So kia ora, and I will hand over to Oriel to close us off with a karakia. Thank you.
Kia ora ana koutou katoa. Kia inoi tātou. Unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia ki te uru tapu nui. Kia wātea, kia māma, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua I tāra tangata. Koiara e rongo whakairi ake ki runga. Tūturu whakamaua ki a Tina. Tina. Haumi e hui e. Tai ki e.
Tai ki e.
Fantastic, everybody. Ka kite.